Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Thank you to Matt and the board of directors for having me down. It's a pleasure to be down here. This is my first time coming down to San Diego to work with you all, so hope to come back in the future, and thank you so much for having me. As Matt said, my name's Andrew Robson. I'm a bonsai professional from Portland, Oregon. I'm one of the organizers for the Pacific Bonsai Expo, which is going to happen February 5, 6, and 7, 2027. So a year from next February, come up to Oakland. Actually, we're going to be in Pleasanton, California next time for one of the largest vendor areas in the country, and really, really fun exhibit. Tonight we're going to talk about clump-style tridents. A lot of what we're talking about might apply to other species as well. So, but yeah, let's get started with the program. So, you can go to the next slide for me. So, clump style, the Japanese word for clump style is kabudachi. Kabudachi means many trunks connected at the base. And so there's a lot of different plants that can be clump style. If you go to Japan and look at bonsai, you're going to see a lot of momiji, Japanese maples that are clump style. Ginkgo is a very famous one that grows well down here. Ginkgos, lots of trunks connected at the base to make a nice flame shape. But clump style maples are kind of one of the most common forms for multi-trunk maples. Kaide is the Japanese word for trident. So, why do clump style? What's one of the benefits of doing this? How might this help you with your bonsai at home? When you have multiple trunks contributing to the silhouette of branches, you're going to get to the finish line faster. So, if you've ever been one of these bonsai people that said, well, I'm kind of old, I don't know if I have enough time for this. I've never heard that phrase before, but if you're one of the people who secretly think that or say it under your breath at a workshop, clump styles or forests or any multi-trunk forms are great forms to work with because you can get somewhere a lot faster than if you just have a single tree getting to the finish line. If you have 7 or 11 or 15 trees, you have a lot more trees giving you more branches to get a nice full silhouette of twigs. So clump styles or forests are great for people who feel like they have a very little time in bonsai. I promise you have more time than you think you do to make trees, but great way to save time and have something that looks nice faster. All right, let's look at a few pics of inspiration since we're trying to recreate nature in miniature. So if we go to the first slide, this is a group of trees. Now, for these clump-style trees, this group that you see here, when you see a group of trees growing together in the wild, I want you to look at that photo. If you took away and kind of hid the multiple trunks, it almost looks like if it's one tree. All the multiple trees are kind of growing together to create kind of one overall tree form. And so let's go to the next slide. We're going to see this in a few more ways. Yeah, multiple trunks here, but from a glimpse or from afar, it might look like it's just one tree. Let's go to the next one. Same thing here. Multiple trunks coming up, but we just kind of have one overall tree form. So this is going to give us some clues for how we might style these and develop them as bonsai. Individual trunks don't necessarily have their own canopies, their own sets of branches. They're kind of, like bees in a beehive, kind of, working in one community together. Let's do one more photo. This one's kind of fun because you have like a little natural raft on the bottom there. But again, multiple trunks, when they're growing next to each other, especially when they're deciduous trees, they will create the form of one overall kind of plant, not many individual trees together. Let's go to the next photo. I think the next series of photos are some multi-trunk maples that I've been collecting in Oregon. So as a deciduous bonsai professional, I don't necessarily have thousands of old Japanese maple bonsai at my fingertips to play with. We're still a young bonsai community in America. So one of the ways that I've been sourcing material for my garden is collecting a lot of trees. And up in Oregon where I live, we have a maple called vine maple, which is the only maple in the Palmatum family located outside of Asia. 20 million years ago when the Pacific Rim land bridge was formed, Japanese maple and its kind of sister species kind of stretched all the way from Japan up through Alaska down to the Pacific Northwest. And so we have these remnants of that period of time, these vine maples that are very Japanese maple-like, but they grow in these really nice clumps. So I go to these lava flows where you see all these lava boulders and collect a lot of these trees, and many of them end up being clump style. So if we go to the next photo, one of the nice ways to spot them is go collect when it's in fall color, because when you're out on this big field of rocks and all the plants look the same, you can easily spot the maples. So these are just some fun natural clumps that I see when I'm out in the wild collecting, and can serve as nice inspiration for some of these forms. So we can go to the next photo. So these kind of clumpy maples, this is a kind of a more shrubby kind of approach to the form that we're going to make today. Let's go one more photo. Here's me kind of collecting some of those trees. You wear knee pads because where I collect these, you're in lava flows where you're just standing on billions of lava rocks that could be anywhere from the size of a golf ball to a boulder the size of this table. And every step you take, the rock moves and wiggles a little bit, so it's kind of dangerous out there. But it's a fun place to go collect some maples. You have lots of fun, interesting plants in the woods and mountains and nature all around you. It might not necessarily be something that you see coming out of a show from Japan, but I definitely recommend going and looking for stuff out in the wild, because you can find some really interesting forms that maybe not many people have played with. Vine maple is not a very popular species for bonsai, but I'm finding some really interesting forms. We go to one more photo. This kind of a natural clump style that I collected. I think there's 5 trunks on that one. A little hard to see in the picture there. My golden retriever Bailey helping me out with the repot. But those are the kind of natural clumps I'm able to collect out in the woods. Let's go one more photo. So we're off to the bonsai inspiration. So we have a little bit of natural inspiration. Let's look at the bonsai inspiration for what we're going to be doing today. Shohin is one option. Shohin and large bonsai are kind of 2 different art forms. If you ask someone in Japan about Shohin, they'll say, oh, that's not bonsai. In America, we kind of group it all together: Shohin, azaleas, normal bonsai. It's kind of all under this one umbrella kind of thing. In Japan, Shohin, azaleas, and bonsai are all separate communities that have separate shows, separate professionals, separate clubs, separate kind of everything. It's all kind of very distinct. So for Shohin in particular, clump-style maples, this tree here in my hand is doing that same thing that those big trees did. It's multiple trunks, but it's growing as if it's one form. Something about those multiple trunks too is look at how they're all fused at the base. For anyone who did the workshop this morning, or for the demonstration that we're about to do here in a few minutes, the trunks will fuse together and grow as if it's one trunk. And one of the benefits of that is you get a really nice nabari at the base there. So those trunks over time fuse together, those multiple trunks come up. With Shohin, it's really, really important to have a lot of mass in a small size. It's one of the few aspects of bonsai where size really does equal quality. With a Shohin, you don't want any thin trunks. But if you have a lot of thin trunks, you can get to that mass that we're looking for, because that little tree in my hands in the photo has to stand up to a big, beautiful bonsai that you'd see at the Pacific Bonsai Expo or at the Kokofu show in Japan. It's got to have the same amount of kind of, presence and impressiveness. And if you have just a little tiny trunk like this here, while it might be the correct height for a Shohin, it doesn't really feel like a bonsai when it's small. So one way to create mass with Shohin is to have multiple trunks, and have those multiple trunks kind of giving it the visual weight that it needs to stand up to some of the bigger trees. So here's another really famous Shohin trident maple. Again, all those trunks fuse at the base, and those multiple trunks come up, and they make a nice silhouette with all the twigs. And they're behaving like we saw in the natural photos, as if it's one plant. So a side trunk, while it technically was a trunk in a separate tree at one point in time, it behaves like it's just a side branch on the tree. Let's take one more photo. This is a photo I took at the 50th anniversary of Gafuten this year, which is the top Shohin exhibition. Another clump-style maple. Again, if you look at the trees, kind of okay to see them next to it. Big trunks, but then you have this clump-style tree that has so many trunks that it's getting the visual mass to stand up to those really chunky trees that it's sitting next to. Let's do one more photo. There's another little clump style. This one has less pronounced trunks. It's kind of a lot of thinner trunks, but really strong fusion at the base. And let's do one more photo. All right, now we're off to big bonsai. So, big bonsai inspiration. For anyone who took the workshop this morning, all the plants that we put together and the plant that I'm going to put together right now, or in a few minutes, can either be a shohin, it can be a big tree. It's a little bit undetermined at this stage, but as they get older, that's when some of that stuff will start to set in stone. So here's what big bonsai clump maples look like. We're starting off with a few older pictures. So these are from Kokofu from like 30, 40 years ago, and then I think I have a few modern updates of what these grow into. So this is a relatively young composition here. Young composition means it's probably 20 or 30 years old, which for bonsai in Japan is young. And this young bonsai here, while it's nice enough to be displayed at Kokofu, again, look, multiple trunks, strong fusion at the base. Over time, this plant in the slide still has a little bit of individuality. The trunks haven't really kind of grown together and fused together as nicely as some of those shohin, but when we see a few more photos in the next slides, you'll see how these kind of mature and develop. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another young one that I took on the bench somewhere. Again, a very young form. I think this was 20 years old at the time of the photo. So very, very young tree in the works. If we go to the next slide, we'll probably start to see some older versions. Now, the previous two slides had relatively straight trunks, and that's what they do for tridents the majority of the time. If you want a really curvy trunk maple clump, that they tend to use Japanese maple for that. Japanese maple doesn't really grow very well down here, so if you want that kind of look, you can do that with trident, and we do see a few examples of that. So this trident here, again, has a little bit more movement in the trunks. This is only 3 trunks, so it's kind of a triple clump, but still multiple trunks connected at the base, still very much a clump style. Let's go to the next slide. I think we have... Oh yeah, and then here's a fun variation of this, and anyone who did the workshop this morning or want to make one of these at home, you can do this too, is once you get those trunks fused together, one possible way or thing to do with it is actually make a root over rock and put it over a stone. So this is still a kabudachi, but it's a kabudachi ishiski. It's a root over rock clump style form, which you actually see fairly commonly for tridents in Japan. So a fun kind of variation on this form that adds maybe one more step of complexity is multiple trunks growing over stone kind of fused together. This is a more mature version than some of the 2 or 3 previous slides. And you can see as it's more mature, the trunks no longer kind of have their individual shapes. The overall form of the silhouette, the density of fine branches, are kind of fusing to make that kind of one tree look. So this is getting closer to that inspiration that we saw in some of the natural photos. Let's do one more. And then this is another fun variation. A famous clump style root over rock-ish trident that's on display. I took that photo 2 weeks ago at the Omiya Bonsai Museum in Saitama, Japan. Really, really famous trident group. It's planted over a nice stone. And so just a couple variations on this style. If you want to add a little bit of complexity, a little bit of naturalness, throwing a stone in there is always a nice way to do that. So those are a few different pieces of what we can do with these trees. I think that might be our last slide, but let's just check. Yeah. So if you ever are passing through Portland, Oregon, you're more than welcome to come by and see my garden. You'll be greeted by Bailey, who's my golden retriever there in the photo, and Birch, who's the puppy who's about 1.5 years old right now. That photo is taken in wintertime. All my trees are not dead. They're just out of leaf in the wintertime. I know you don't have a ton of deciduous trees down here, but I specialize in deciduous trees, and you'll see more of those in my garden than you tend to see in most bonsai gardens. So if you're ever passing through Portland, you're more than welcome to come by and visit. Yeah, I think we'll get started with some of the demonstration. But before I dive in and start making one of these from scratch, any questions about what we've talked about last few slides? Yeah, question in the back.
Thank you. So if you love Japanese maple and you live in San Diego and not Portland, what can we do to maximize the potential for growing a healthy Japanese maple?
Yeah, if you want Japanese maples but you live in San Diego, it's tough. If you can't change your zip code, then it's going to be a really, really tricky haul. There's a few things that you can do. There are a few heat-tolerant species of Japanese maple that you might try. When I say heat-tolerant, I know you don't get super hot here, but you don't really have winter here. So that's the main thing that Japanese maples are missing, why a lot of the trees that you'll see in my garden don't necessarily survive in San Diego, is because they don't get the proper chilling hours in wintertime. And so you can probably keep a Japanese maple alive for 5 years. So if you want to just keep buying some and cycle through, that's one way to do it. Typically 5 years is kind of the mark where if it can survive past the 5-year mark, then it's a good species for San Diego. But that's typically when we see species start to peter out. If you're trying to work with a species that's on the edge, that's like maybe not so ideal for your climate, really changing your practice to be really on top of everything can help maximize the results. So you guys have really, really, really bad water here. And so the first thing that I would do if I moved to San Diego, I would not water my bonsai with anything but RO water, reverse osmosis water, because the tap water will really, really set your trees back. And to do the type of bonsai that I'm interested in, really high level refined bonsai, the trees can't just survive. They need to kind of thrive as well. And so the water is the main thing that we do. The main way that we touch our trees on the most frequent basis is with watering. And so if you can use good quality water for your trees versus the kind of hard, high ppm tap water that you get out of the tap, that would be probably the biggest advantage that you could give to kind of make a tree survive. One thing that you could do is you could have your tree here in the kind of summertime, the growing season, then you could ship it up to Peter T for to give it a winter for 3 or 4 months. I know several people in the Bay Area do that. That could be an option. Shade cloth is another thing that can really, really help out deciduous trees. So if it's above kind of 70, 80 degrees, I'd have a Japanese maple, even if the trident that we're going to work on today, under about 50% shade cloth, just to block the intensity of the sun. But really kind of upping your horticulture can kind of help those kind of species on the edge, kind of give them the fighting chance. So, but yeah, Japanese maple's a little less ideal for the zip code. But
Andrew,
definitely try.
If you're, I'm behind you. If you're using reverse osmosis water, do you fill a tub with it and add minerals back in, or do you?
Yeah. Good point. So if you're using reverse osmosis water, definitely don't do reverse osmosis deionization, RODI. That strips 100% of the stuff out of the water. Regular reverse osmosis will strip about 95% out. So don't do the extra deionization process. If you are using RO water, adding a little bit of nutrients back in via like a very diluted Miracle Grow or Dynagrow or Grow Big from Fox Farm or just any kind of good liquid fertilizer in a very small microdosed amount can really kind of bring the water back up to. If you're just using plain RO water, it's kind of a little bit too basic and doesn't have enough nutrients for the trees to grow. So, other questions? All right, I think we're going to jump into making some tridents now. If anyone has questions throughout this, let me know. So,
please wait for the microphone if you have a question.
All right. So, we have a bunch of young trident whips here. These whips were sourced from Matawinga, who grows a lot of seedlings and sells a lot of pots out in Maryland, good friend of mine. And so we have a nice set of these young tridents here. What I'm going to do with these is I'm going to just kind of sort them out, grade them a little bit, and kind of get the roots all kind of situated at the same level. Basically, I'll talk you through what we do before we do it. Our goal today is to get these trees as close together as possible so they fuse together. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just lining these up so I can get the roots all at the exact same level. And then we are going to use a zip tie to secure and hold these nice and tight. I'm going to take my main trunk or my thickest trunks first and kind of group them a little bit towards the center. And then with my smaller trunks, I'll kind of put them around outside on the perimeter. One of the nice things about working with young bonsai is the tree that I'm putting together today has infinite quality potential. There is nothing bad built into these trees yet. The older it gets, the more the potential for quality is kind of determined. But at this stage, this plant could be the best trident maple clump that's ever existed. So that's one of the nice things about young trees is quality really does apply to every budget level. We have maybe $50 to $100 of materials here. This could end up being a winner in the Pacific Bonsai Expo. So the younger you start, while you are sacrificing time, you really do have infinite quality potential. And the older this gets, that's when the quality of this that either lets it get in and win a prize at the Pacific Bonsai Expo, or turns out to be a tree that's maybe just good for a club show, or a tree that someone just chucks in the trash bin one day. The older it gets, the more that quality is started to be determined. So I'm going to kind of take these trees, I'm going to group them as close together as possible. And then I'm going to take a zip tie and lock this in. In bonsai, the two variables that we work with are kind of time and when you're trying to get material, time and money. And so you're either going to spend a lot of money to get a nice tree that's quote done, or you're going to spend a lot of time with something like this to get it to where it needs to be. Time and money are the two variables that we think of with bonsai that determine kind of pricing and everything else. But like I said, with a young group of tridents like this has infinite quality potential, and because I have probably 11 or 13 trunks in here, that's really going to speed up my development process, because I already have a head start. If I just had one individual seedling, I have a lot of work to do to get a lot of branches on here. Versus when I have 11 of these, I'm kind of already quite a big step ahead. So I took my zip tie, I cinched it as tight as I possibly could around the base of these, just above where the roots are, to kind of get that situated. Do we have some tools somewhere nearby? They might be right in front of me. I'm probably missing them. Scissors. Maybe a perfect. Thank you. I think that's good. Thank you, Matt. So I have my trees all tied together. Kind of. There's no real kind of easy way to do this. One of the nice things too about young trees you don't have to have anything kind of set in stone. This, when we're done today, is not going to have a front. Kind of everything's up for kind of debate on something young like this. My goal to make this the highest quality tree possible is just put some good information into it, get it set up so that it can grow the way that I want to, grow it in a more kind of controlled way. So I have my trees all tied together, my roots all kind of lined up. I'm going to just start by taking off the bottom set of those roots that are just kind of unnecessary, unneeded. Then what I'll do is I'll come in here, I'll see if there's any kind of tap roots that I can cut back, any kind of thick roots that are coming down on some of these kind of bigger saplings that we really don't need. When you have very young maples like this, they are incredibly tough. I could take off 90% of these roots and they all still have a good fighting chance. We're not going to do that, but we could.
Andrew, with these Kabadachi, do you tend to follow like forest rules, odd numbers only, a mix of different sizes? Yeah,
good question. We do tend to follow forest rules, but at this age, it doesn't matter that much. So forest rules mean we want our thickest trees to be our tallest trees. We want our thinnest trees to be our shortest trees. If it's under 10 trees in total, I want to kind of focus on odd numbers, because under 10, our eye really spots pairs. And when we kind of see, let's say I had 6 trees, I'd just very easily be able to see 2, 2, 2 on that. So having an odd number kind of tends to give it a little bit more natural look and feel. I find over 10 that your eye can't really pick apart pairs anymore. So we have all these trees kind of tied up on here. We're going to get this situated on the disc. But yeah, with young plants, with a clump style, with Kabadachi, it behaves like a forest, except the only difference is they're connected at the base versus not. However, a very old forest, if you go to Japan and look at forest bonsai that have been around for 70, 80 years, you will find that they two will fuse at the base over time. So every forest bonsai, as long as they're not super spread apart, the fusing is kind of inevitable. With a kabudachi, we get it kind of immediately. With a forest, we get it over maybe a generation or two. All right, so we're going to use some soil here to get this kind of situated. The soil that we're using is akadama and pumice. This is a blend that we got from Jonas at Bonsai Tonight. It's called Aoki blend, A-O-K-I. Aoki blend is a soil that I've been using for years. It's about 80% akadama. It's about 20% kiryu, or kind of river pumice. And, you know, I've done a lot of travel in Japan. I think I've been to Japan 5 times this year. I've been a lot in previous years. Something that I notice with every high-level bonsai that I see in Japan, you go to the Kokufu exhibit, you walk down the exhibit, you go to the top gardens of Komura, Shinji Suzuki, Kunio Kobayashi, Hiroshi Takayama. You go to all the gardens in Japan that have good bonsai, and they're all using basically the same mix. Not necessarily Aoki blend, but they're using about 70-80% akadama, 20-30% pumice. That is because that material just creates the best roots possible. I probably repot, as a traveling bonsai artist, I probably repot 1,000 trees a year, probably 100 trees at home and 900 trees on the road. We just repotted 10 trees today. This is going to be 11. What I see visually when I repot trees is when people have a high percentage of akadama, then I find really, really good roots. When you don't have a high percentage of akadama, I have never seen good roots. Something that I would classify as good, meaning dense, fine roots that when you take the tree out of the pot, don't just all fall away. The soil doesn't all fall away. And so I'm a big believer in this mix. It is a little expensive, but it creates the best results. And if we're trying to do high-level bonsai, we need the stuff that's going to give us the best results. So we're going to use this Aoki blend here. Now, if you look at this pot, we have a plastic disc in here. And this plastic disc is going to allow the roots to hit that disc and grow out rather than down. And that's really, really important because with young maples, with any kind of deciduous bonsai, we're primarily focused on the roots rather than the actual trunks. We're going to play and bend with the trunks after I get this kind of wired on to here. But the trunks are less important at this stage than developing good roots. And that's what this plastic disc is going to do, is get us started with some good roots kind of right away. What's going to happen is the tree is going to come down. It's going to hit that disc. The roots are going to flare outward. So I'm kind of forcing that flare to happen. It has no choice but to grow around that disc, flare out, and then kind of dive down on the edges that you kind of see in the very limited space that's around the sides. The roots will do that because they want to kind of chase the water and nutrients down in the pot. But we really want to focus on getting those roots to have the initial movement growing out. Because if I just put this in the pot, I'm already starting with really bad nabari. Maybe I'm taking a tree that could be a kokufu tree or could be a kokufu winter, and I'm knocking it down a step. These roots, when they're this young, they need to be corrected to be kind of flared outwards. So what this disc is going to do is it's going to allow me to kind of flare those roots out so they get that nice kind of initial movement to grow downwards. So we're going to get this kind of set up and situated. Any questions while I get some more soil in here? Yeah.
Did you make the plastic disc? Where did you get them?
They just showed up. Matt, our program director, sourced them from somewhere. You can speak to that.
They're 4-inch just plastic discs that you use to paint ornaments on. So I got like 30 of them from Amazon for like $7.
Other questions?
Is the disc technique specific to clump, building clump style, or is that something that's used for single?
Good question. You can
other
do
styles?
You can do the disc technique for basically any deciduous plant. You can even do it for conifers. I always joke, some of the best conifer growers that I've seen in Japan are deciduous people, meaning like 90% of the yard are Japanese maples, but then they have a couple black pines that they've played with, and those black pines have the best nabaris, have the best kind of trunk lines that I've seen of any bonsai in Japan. So with these plants, there's lots of different ways to create good nabari. I could take, instead of a deep pot like this, I could just put it into a pot that's only 1 inch deep, and then the roots are forced to grow out that way. I could also take these, I could put them in a deep pot with a fake bottom, which is kind of what we have here, is kind of simulating that shallow pot. One other way to do a clump style is we take something like this, or we actually take like a bathroom ceramic tile, drill a bunch of holes through it, and then thread the trees through the holes. And then they're forced to grow out over that tile, kind of naturally, or tile, naturally layer themselves, and then you get a nice nabari as they kind of fuse over that tile that way. So lots of different ways to get to the same finish line. This is kind of one of the easiest ways. But the benefit of a deep pot kind of early on is we get all of the nice moisture that a deep pot is going to have, all of the extra room for roots. But the roots, with the fake bottom, the roots are kind of forced to make that initial movement out. Yeah, another question.
Could you zip tie the trees around like a rock or something to kind of give them some width initially, or you just wait for them to grow to do that?
If you were going to, you want to make one of the ones that grow over the stone, if you were going to do that, I'd say probably start it in this pot, have it grow in here 2-3 years, and then once it's kind of nicely fused, then transition it to the stone. So this is kind of, I think, the same starting point, whether you want the stone or not. Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
They're always telling us not to constrict the trunk too much because it'll leave marks. So I wonder how long is the zip tie going to stay on? And likewise, you said drilling holes through ceramic. Are you going to break apart that tile at some point? Or?
Yeah, the zip tie will stay on here for probably a year. Basically, we're grafting these trees together. And for any grafting, you need really, really good contact. Otherwise, if they don't have good contact, then they won't be forced to fuse. So these zip ties will stay on here until either we get fusion or until the trees actually start to grow around the zip ties, in which case we might cut the zip tie off and put a new one on that's not biting in so bad. So just like a wire, how it can bite in on our branches and we take it off, if we see the zip tie doing that, we cut it off, we replace it, but we leave it on there until all these chunks at the bottom have fused together.
And then that zip tie needs to be as close to the top of the roots as possible?
That's how I like to start it. That way, it's connected where it counts, but then we can use some wires to kind of flare these out and have some individuality in their movements. So, other questions? While I'm answering questions, what I've been doing is I've just been kind of slightly and gently bending the roots out. So what I'm trying to do is create a nice kind of radial perimeter where all these roots kind of flare their way outwards. And I'm just doing a little bit of pre-bending on the roots so that we can sit this on that nice disc a little bit easier. I'm going to take a little bit of soil, just put a little tiny mound on top of that disc where these are going to press down onto. And then we're going to flare this around and tie these down. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take all these roots, kind of flare them out so I'm getting that nice kind of radial pattern to start with, and then setting them down on here. Where most people have failed with deciduous bonsai in the United States is with lack of nabari work and not doing enough work to set up the roots early enough. We've gotten pretty good at growing trunks in this country. We've gotten pretty good at starting material, but we still don't come anywhere close to Japanese bonsai development in terms of creating a nice set of roots. And that's why I said a few minutes ago, what I do at the top of these trees is almost not really important right now. The most important thing is just getting this initial root correction, because that's the thing that's really hard to fix when the trees kind of get older and develop. I have 365 days a year that I can play with these branches. But the only time that I can play with these roots is like the 1 hour every few years that I'm doing the repotting kind of process. And so this is kind of my one opportunity right now to make a nice correction with these roots. And so I'm going to kind of be really careful. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting this set up exactly how I need it to be so that down the road, I can always play with these branches, but the roots we want to get kind of lined up pretty critical. So I have this nicely seated on that disc. What I'm going to do now is kind of use some wires to hold this all down. Any questions while I get this secured on here? Yeah.
There,
What was that?
is there a right way and a wrong way to do the wiring?
Is there a right way and a wrong way to do wiring? At this stage of the development, it doesn't matter too much. Depending on who you study with, I got it, yeah. Depending on who you study with, they tend to have different anchor points. So the type of anchoring that I'm doing right now is called the box method, which is actually a good approach for anything that doesn't really have a good thing to tie down to. And with these kind of small trees here, we don't necessarily have a great kind of anchor point. All these roots are really tiny. And so it's a great kind of cage to wrap around these roots and kind of really lock and tie this in the early stages. This is one of the worst ways to tie down a deciduous tree. It's the most functional for what I'm doing right now, but if you look at where my wire is, it's over all of the important roots that I've kind of just splayed out. So it's kind of the only choice that I have to really get this nicely anchored in the short term, but in the long term, I will not be using this method for tying down because it just kind of has wire way too close to my nabari and my roots. With a really old bonsai, we retain so many fine roots on an old bonsai that you get like this nice dense loaf of fine roots. And that dense loaf that you get with an older bonsai, you can drive a chopstick into and you can put your wire over the chopstick so you don't have wires going into any actual roots. And for all old things that have been a bonsai for longer than 10 years, that's kind of the preferred tie-down method for a lot of Japan, is to kind of, let's say this is my root mass here, same big chunk tree, big beech that I just repotted. This is my root mass, so many fine roots in here, tens of thousands of fine roots from that broken down akadama over time. I would take a chopstick, I would drive it into the side of this root mass, drive it into this side, and then my wire would tie down over that chopstick. That's how probably 80% of bonsai are repotted in Japan, is driving into a dense mass of fine roots. How do you get a dense mass of fine roots? High percentage akadama. Never seen dense fine roots without that soil mixture. And that's also for a wide range of climates. So I have clients in LA, I have clients in Boston, and in New York, and in Alaska, all over the world, and I've seen the same results no matter where people live with that same soil mixture. So this is nicely kind of anchored down on there. You know, I could pick this up, swing it around the room. It's not going anywhere. So we have to use that kind of cage method to get it kind of over all of those roots in the beginning, but this is probably the last time we'll ever do that. So now I'm going to take the rest of my soil. I'm going to chopstick it into the remaining kind of spaces in the fine roots here. We're going to have our nabari slightly buried. When you have a young deciduous bonsai, even an intermediate stage deciduous bonsai, if you expose your nabari too fast, then you create erosion, which actually hurts your nabari, not helps it. You want to keep your nabari covered for longer than you think you might want, especially with a young plant like this, because if it's covered with soil, it's going to develop and get better. Once you expose it, all that development kind of stops. And so with something like this, I'm going to have the soil about an inch above where all of my roots are, so that I get really nice development happening underneath all of that soil. We don't want to have any sight of it in the near future. So we're just going to kind of make sure that soil is situated in between all of those roots. And then what we're going to do is come in and do some branch styling. Questions? All right. This is something that you can do with a lot of different species at home. So trident is a good one for your climate. That's going to work just fine. You could do this with ginkgo, which grows well down here. I have several clients in LA who have very nice ginkgos. Flame style ginkgo is very, very common form that you see in Japanese bonsai, and would work. This would be a great way to set one of those up because ginkgos would fuse as well. You could do this with a little less traditional, but not uncommon. You could do this with crepe myrtle if you wanted another deciduous species that might kind of thrive down here. But any deciduous, or even, it doesn't necessarily have to be a deciduous plant. You could do this with ficus. You could do this with camellias. You could do this with a lot of different plants. And whether you're doing shohin or a big tree like we discussed, the setup of this is the same. This is a great method to do if you have rooted cuttings of anything and you don't want your cutting to just look like nothing for a lot of years. If you can get a batch of 10 or 12 cuttings, that root that you can fuse together, you can get a multi-trunk form kind of going that way.
I'm just trying to think of things that grow well down here. Do you think you could build nice olives this way?
You could grow olives this way. Although olives, you can probably just cut them back to a stump and you can get with all the basil sprouting, you can probably get a kabudachi to form that way as well. But yeah, the main deciduous that would be just fine down here, ginkgos are something that I would have a lot of. Elms, if you wanted an elm clump, you could do it like this. Tridents like we're doing is this here. What other deciduous are pretty happy down here? I know it's not a long list. Liquid amber. If you wanted a nice liquid amber clump, you could do it with this. Wisteria. We tend not to have wisteria clumps, and I don't know how well they would fuse, but wisteria bonsai do very, very well down here in Southern California. All right, so we have this nice and set up, chopsticked in. We're going to grab some wire now and start to shape these trunks here. So I'm going to grab some aluminum wire is what I'm using, which is our preferred wire for deciduous bonsai. And then I'm going to take aluminum wire that's the same size as the branch, or in this case trunk, and that's my kind of gauge for how much thickness I need. So aluminum wire, same size as my trunk. With something like this, we're going to have to eventually cut this back to start creating some taper. And so I'm mostly interested in the movement kind of below where my hand is right now. Above where my hand is, that's probably stuff that's just going to get cut off in the future. If I happen to have a wire that goes up there, I'll just keep going with it. But just kind of for my kind of sake, I know that anything above where my hand is right now, no matter if this is going to be a shohin, if it's going to be a big tree, it's probably something that's going to get cut off. So I'm going to focus my kind of movement and my attention into everything that's kind of below where my hand is right now. I'm going to take my wire, I'm going to cut a point on it so it drives into that soil a little easier. And then we're going to start wrapping some wire on some of these trunks. The soil, when you have a multi-trunk form, putting the wire in the soil is a really great anchor point. And cutting the point on it kind of helps drive it into that soil a little bit better. So I'm using aluminum wire, like I said. I'm trying to get wire that's the same size as these trunks that I'm trying to bend. Most of this is going to be somewhere between a 2 and a 3. So 2, 2.5, and 3 for the wire. If I have a long piece of wire, I'll just kind of use it, but really I'm focused on the first few inches. Normally when I'm applying wire to any type of bonsai, I kind of get it on there first, and then once it's on there, then I kind of bend it around and make it look nice. But mostly I kind of separate, applying it and bending it as two separate techniques.
I have a question again.
Yeah.
So you're putting it on, twisting in one direction or another. Is that related to any plan to twist the branch itself in a certain direction, or are you twisting them all the same way because it's easier to do? You're right-handed, or?
Say your question one more time, or
There's two ways to twist it, right? You could go clockwise or counterclockwise.
Clockwise or counterclockwise, yeah.
Do you do them all the same, or do you have some plan?
I never think about it. I probably wire hundreds of trees a year. It's not something that I concern myself. I'm more concerned with having a nice wrap on the wire, having the wire be the correct size. Whether you go left or clockwise or counterclockwise doesn't really matter. Some people get really particular about some things like that. I find that's not the right thing to be particular about. Not something that I'm focused on. Getting the correct size, the correct wrapping on it, I think is much more important. Some people really worry about that. Should the wire start underneath the branch or above the branch? Again, something I never really worry about. As long as it's functional, it's beautiful, and it's going to get the branch where I need it to go. That's what I'm mostly concerned with. Good questions.
Andrew, I haven't worked with a lot of trees this young. Are the gloves protecting you from the tree or the tree from you?
A little bit of both.
Okay. I just don't know if there's oils we should be worried about with saplings this young, or if it's...
Yeah, a little bit of both. The young trees are really fun to work with. And like I said, if you're going to do young trees, if we just had one of these, it would take it a long time to grow. like something. The benefit of a multi-trunk form, like a kabudachi clump like we're doing right now, or like a forest planting, which if you come to my place, I probably have more forests in my backyard than any other bonsai professional in the U.S. I'm doing that because, like I said, I can't do what some of my colleagues do and just go up in the mountains and find like the perfect Japanese maple just sitting there ready to be collected, worked on for 2-3 years, and become a nice show-winning bonsai. That's our method for getting nice conifers is to go get Yamadori. I don't have that at my disposal. I am finding some deciduous Yamadori, but the numbers are much lower. So I'm having to make a lot of material myself. And when you're making material, like I said, in the multi-trunk form, whether it's a forest, whether it's a clump style, whether it's a raft, the more trunks that you have contributing to that silhouette, the faster it's going to look like something. And so if you're one of those people who are concerned with time, then it's a nice way to kind of cheat a little bit. A few more chunks to get wired, and then we'll do some shaping. Like I said, this is a great technique to do at home, especially if you have like rooted cuttings or something like that. This is a great technique if you have lots of different cuttings. Another thing that you can do with several trunks like this is you could actually kind of braid or spiral them together and make kind of an exposed root kind of form as well. So there's a lot of possibilities if you get a little bundle of plants the same kind of age and size. If you're a shohin person, let's say these were kumquats, kinzu, the little tiny citrus shohin that are so popular in Japan. If you're a shohin person and you wanted a nice thick trunk kinzu, one way to get that is take a group of 10 plants, kind of do exactly what we did, kind of zip tie, fuse them together. You would kind of braid them all together in a way that kind of looks like they're all twisted and contorted. And then all these together, you would start to bend as one kind of trunk, shape some movement. So that's one way to make a clump style tree. You can even do that with a trident maple as well. What that would look like I said, is these are all zip tied together. Let's say I kind of braid these around a little bit. I just kind of bend this whole thing to create a nice trunk shape, and eventually this all fuses together. And again, I have 12 trunks in here, creating some instant masks. That as they fuse over time, you get some nice texture on the trunk. We're not going to do that with this today since we're doing kabudachi, but that's one method for creating kind of fused trunk shohin.
Will those fuse while they're wired?
What was that?
Will they fuse while they're wired?
If we were going to do that fuse method, what I would have done instead of wrapping each individual tree is I would kind of braid them all together and then put a wire around the entire mass on the outside. So we kind of do a slightly different wiring technique when we do that. Good question, though.
Have you had any luck with like oaks or ficus, something that isn't going to drop their leaves?
Yeah, so if we were going to do this exact thing that we're doing right now with a ficus, what I would do is I would defoliate it and then do the same thing. So cut all the leaves off your ficus, make it look like it's deciduous, and then that's your opportunity to repot it and then kind of do exactly what we're doing right now. If you were going to do it with an oak, some species of oaks you can defoliate. So you could do it with one of those species and just defoliate it and then pot it up. If it's a species like, let's say, coastal live oak, where you don't want to necessarily defoliate it, that's where I might, you can still do exactly what we're doing. It's just you're going to have some leaves to kind of navigate around in the repotting process. Other questions?
Is it possible to do this to conifer whips as like tanuki with extra steps and then strategically kill some?
Absolutely, yeah. You could do this with black pines. So, in fact, there's a style of black pine kind of clumps. They don't necessarily call it kabudachi. I forget what they call it. The Japanese call it, but it's kind of like a bunjin forest where you have like 5 bunjin that are kind of fused together at the base. That's something that I see commonly when I'm in Japan, especially in Tokonoma Kazari or like a Tokonoma display. It's a very, very like imagine a group of like 5 thin trunk, really elegant pines kind of, dancing together. Really, really popular form. So if you like the multi-trunk style, you can definitely do this with conifers. Pines will fuse together just like the tridents here. Junipers might not. Junipers might take a very long time to fuse. So you're better off kind of starting with a natural juniper that has multiple trunks if you want that look. All right, one more wire and then we're going to bend and set these. Any questions before I do some bending?
Yes. Would this work with Chinese elm?
It would definitely work with Chinese elm. So basically any broadleaf tree, be it a broadleaf deciduous or a broadleaf evergreen, this will work just fine with. And then for conifers, pines will work, junipers maybe not so much, but any broadleaf tree, pretty much every ficus, the majority of plants, this method will work. Some things might not fuse as fast, so one of the benefits of doing this with trident maple is that you'll get very, very fast fusion. Maybe by this time next year, all these trunks are fused at the base, if I get really good growth out of this. If not this time next year, by 2 years from now, then I think it definitely would be. All right, so now we have all of these trunks wired. I haven't really bent anything other than just getting a few things out of the way. What I'm going to do now is just kind of start to get some nice movement in. I'm going to put a motif on one of the branches and then just copy that motif as I go around. I want these to look like they all kind of grew together. So I'm going to kind of start them going up, bend them down, and just kind of get some initial movement kind of set up on these. One thing that you really have to do with young trees is you have to exaggerate movement, because as we gain caliper and thickness on the trunks, that movement really smooths out. So if I had a young tree, let's say I had a tree, a little whip like this, and I put in all of this crazy movement on here, something like that. By the time this grows to be 2 inches in caliper, it's going to look like this. Very, very minimal. And the thicker it gets, if this grows to be 12 inches in caliber, it's just going to be a ramrod straight trunk. So something that's really tricky when working with young trees is you kind of have to predict the future a little bit. And if you want a lot of movement, you have to exaggerate it almost to a point where it looks really bad in this young stage, knowing that as things get thicker, the growth kind of changes and the movement changes. So I'm going to put in a lot of movement that's going to look really octopusy, look really kind of dumb. But having done bonsai for 20 years and knowing how these things kind of grow and change, that's where some of that wisdom kind of kicks in. And it's not supposed to look very pretty at every stage of development. For anyone who does like saltwater reef aquariums, when you're setting up a new saltwater tank, they call it the ugly stage, where the tank has, maybe it has a bunch of algae and all the ecosystem of the tank is kind of figuring itself out, and the rocks don't look good, the corals don't look good. Bonsai have an ugly stage too, and the younger bonsai are, the more that ugly stage is apparent. If you've ever gone to a bonsai grower's place and seen these huge sacrifice branches that look like poodle tails growing off the trees, that's kind of ugly stage development. But basically what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of flaring my trunks that are on the outer edge. I'm having those be my lowest trunks. Again, I'm trying to kind of flare things out radially. Bonsai have to look good both from a specific front and from a 3D kind of orientation. With a tree like this, I don't necessarily have a front. I don't know what my front is. I'm not going to have a front on this plant for probably 5 or 10 years. So I don't really care about that. I just want to put in really good information everywhere. And the older this gets, the more information this gets, the more I'll be able to pick have a better front option to pick from down the road. So I'm just getting some nice exaggerated movement in here. Some of the bends that I initially put in, I'm coming back and exaggerating them just a little bit more. But my main goal, like I said, is just flaring things out. And really my main goal beyond that was the initial setup, just getting these on a disc so that the roots are going to grow out rather than down. The nice thing about something like this is we just created a bonsai in a very short period of time. The more young trees, you can have a lot more young trees than you can old trees because these take like 10 seconds to work on them every time that we work on them. Once you start getting old bonsai, if I had a very old trident clump that I was repotting, I would still be scraping the top surface of roots, probably still in the pot before I've taken it out by this time in the program. So young trees, you can have a lot more young trees for the same amount of work than old trees. So we have this kind of nicely situated. It looks a little octopusy. I don't really care about that right now. This isn't going on Instagram or my website portfolio. It's mostly just setting this up for a good future, which is what I think we've done on here. Primarily, we've done it by getting it on a disc for the roots. But secondarily, we've done it to get some nice trunk shape and movement, get things kind of growing out in a radial fashion. It's not that these branches are going to live in these positions, but I'm setting myself up for kind of good decisions to kind of happen down the road. I don't necessarily care how these look like. Like I said, this thing might get cut back to the first 3 inches at some point, in which case maybe that initial bend or two that I put in is all that's actually going to be sustainable on a tree like this. But I'm giving myself good option. I wired much more than I needed just so that if I do cut it back somewhere, I get to make a good choice all along the way. So, like I said, the most important thing with young trees, you're just setting yourself up for good options. I don't have all the answers right now. I have no idea what this is going to look like down the road. This could be a shohin. It could be a big tree. I'm just setting it up for that. The next time I work on this, I have good momentum to build off of. The older a bonsai gets, the more important it is to have that front, to know where you're going, to know this is going to be a shohin, to have all those things figured out. This stage, a little less critical. So I think that's about where we're going to end up on this today. Any questions about what we did making an initial clump style maple? Yeah.
Can you give us an average timeline for something like this? What to expect? 3 years, 5 years?
Yeah. So if this was sitting in my backyard, I teach a lot of shohin. If you come to my yard, you're going to see a greenhouse full of shohin and a garden full of big trees. So my heart is kind of in the big trees. So if you came to my house, I'd probably be inclined more naturally, instinctively, to make this into a big tree. So let's say the timeline for this tree, let's say the next year, and then we'll talk about future years. So next year, I just put a bunch of wire on these branches. That wire is going to have to come off about 6 to 8 weeks after this leafs out. When is this going to leaf out? I have no idea. It's a trident that we just took from Maryland to San Diego. So maybe it leafs out in 2 weeks. Maybe it leafs out in 2 months. Whenever it leafs out, that kind of starts that kind of 6 to 8 week counter to where the wire is going to start biting into these trunks as these leaf out and grow and start to develop and thicken. So I'll take that wire off in 6 to 8 weeks after it starts growing, whenever that is. After I take the wire off, I'm not going to do anything on this. I would just let it sit on my bench. I would fertilize it. I would give it a lot of fertilizer because it's a young tree that we're trying to push. I would let all of these extensions run. So the extension on every single trunk at the very tip, we're not going to cut those back. We're going to let those run, even if they run to be 7-8 feet long. That length is going to build caliper and thickness, and that caliper and thickness is going to fuse these all together. So I'm going to let this run like a crazy bush. Like I said, this is kind of the ugly stage, so it's not supposed to look pretty at this stage of development. Let those run until it fuses. Probably next year sometime, I might come back in with a second set of wire. A lot of these will have little side branches that have kind of shooted off the main trunk. So maybe I wire the main trunks again if I'm not happy where they are. Maybe I wire some of the secondary branches that have come off these main trunks. And I just build in a little bit more shape. I would do basically the same thing as I did here. Just get some good information into them, not necessarily knowing where my front is, where they're going to end up, how they're going to be used. And then next year, this time, maybe I'm going to check that zip tie, make sure the trees aren't kind of fusing and growing around the zip tie. If they are, I'll take a scissors, I'll cut that zip tie off, and then I'll take a new one, and then I'll put it back on so that they're still nice and snug, not biting in snug, but still nice and snug so that they keep that fusing process going. And then next year, same thing. I take the wire off in the spring sometime, 6 to 8 weeks after it comes off. I let it just run like crazy for the next year. And then probably after it's been in here for a full 2 growing seasons, that's when I would take it out the following repotting season and edit those roots again. Maybe that's the point where I would take those roots and put it into a shallow pot about this size. So those roots are kind of forced to grow down. If you don't want to put it in a ceramic bonsai pot, you could put this into a wooden box. If any of these have fused together, what I tend to do with a small, young, chunky tree is I screw it right to the bottom of the box. So a screw from underneath up into the trunk so that tree literally has no choice but to send roots out. And my box is super shallow. And so that's kind of the next kind of step is kind of build Nabari and build good options for our trunks. After a few years of doing that, after maybe 1 or 2 repots where we've edited the roots and kind of got them going and moving in that right direction, that's when I would come in and start thinking, maybe this is my main trunk. So I'm going to let this one run. This is a side trunk. I start cutting this one back. But that's maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years kind of down the road. The next several years, we're mostly just focused on thickening these trunks. Now that they all have nice line, I can thicken them freely, and that nice kind of movement that we put in all these kind of gets built in as the trunks thicken. And I'm mostly just focused on getting good information on my trunks and getting my roots growing out. 3 to 5 years after that, that's when we start having some fun, pick a front, start target growing some trees to be thicker, pruning some trees to stay smaller, and then we start kind of looking at some of those inspiration photos and trying to match this to what we're trying to achieve. So, yeah.
As we let this develop, assume we make it a big tree, is this going to keep looking like it has 11 or 12 trunks or whatever this, or are some of them going to do so much that they just look like branches off one of the big trunks?
Yeah, good question. This, it looks very octopusy right now, right? Like it's probably not going to look anything like this if this was in my garden 5 years from now. It probably starts to have some main trunk shape. It probably starts to have some ramification coming off those trunks in that time. And while they're kind of octopusy right now, like I said, I'm mostly interested in that kind of initial flare. For me, this is too much movement. Now, we talked about why we had to exaggerate this movement, because as trunks thicken, it smoothens out. The tridents that I kind of respond to more have a little bit less movement because the movement clumpy trees that I tend to like are the Japanese maples, and those are the ones that make sense to have a lot more elegant kind of movement. I tend to prefer tridents that are a little more simple, because tridents in the wild, they have kind of straighter, more simple trunks, not necessarily crazy elegant lines and whatnot like that. So while it looks very octopusy like right now, down the road, these trunks might appear relatively straight. They're just not going to all come up kind of like a flame-style ginkgo. They're all going to kind of flare out nicely before they smoothen out. So, other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I think there's a raffle and a few other things going on. If you are ever up in Portland, Oregon, feel free to come by and visit my garden. I have some young trees like this, but a lot of kind of intermediate and advanced trees kind of kicking around the garden. Anyone's more than welcome to visit. If I'm ever on the road doing something like this, I have people at home who can give you a tour. So you're more than welcome to visit. If you want to come study deciduous bonsai, I do offer intensive classes at home as well. And like Matt mentioned before, if you have any interest in Shohin bonsai, the top Shohin learning opportunity is going to happen the last weekend of January in Alameda, California. So it's not as far up as Portland, maybe 7-hour drive or something from here. But if you can come up to the Bay Area, we're bringing Daisaku Nomoto in from Japan, who's one of the top Shohin artists in Japan. He's a judge at the top Shohin show called Gafuten, and he will be teaching with me and Jonas. We've done this. This is our 3rd time doing this. If you have any interest in Shohin, it's a kind of all-intensive course for how Shohin bonsai are different than big bonsai, and there's a lot of differences. So we have a lot of workshops. There's a lot of great material in those workshops. Several of that material does really well in your climate. So if you're struggling with a Japanese maple and you want to get something that's going to grow well down here, we have that available. And there's a bring your own tree component as well. So thanks for giving me your time today. I really appreciate you having me out, and we'll turn it over to Matt for the rest of the program. Thank you.